This program does not represent the views of this station and may be considered offensive to some listeners. This program may contain mature subject matter, including frank discussions of controversial topics. It is intended for mature, open-minded audiences. Discretion is highly advised. This program is entirely independently produced by and is copyrighted by Frank. It is broadcast here under license.
You're listening to Frank Talks Pleasures and Lifestyles, and I'm Frank because I have to be. In studio today I have a gentleman by the name of Scot McKay. Scot McKay has burst onto the scene around 2006 and quickly set himself apart with a unique approach he calls character-based. Through a combination of deserving what you want and decoding the opposite sex thought process, Scot talks about how a masculine, confident man of true character and leadership skills is an authentic representation of the man that is most desirable to women, getting rid of the need for tricks and techniques. His next-generation concepts transcend mere pickup and seduction and describe a state of having 100% control over one's dating life, culminating in the ability to attract the highest quality women on Earth, effectively manage relationships, and make wise decisions from a position of strength. Scot is well known for his monumental Virtuosity program, for his multiple top-ranked podcasts on iTunes, and his unique formula for online dating success, in which he objectively demonstrates how to literally dominate one's entire metro area on the dating site of your choice. He also represents a real-world example of how a man can effectively manage a successful dating life all the way to the end goal of building a long-term future with the greatest woman he has ever met. Scot's ultimate proof of concept is his wife, Emily, who is his podcast co-host and a well-known dating expert in her own right. Welcome to Frank Talks, Scot McKay.
Hey, Frank, what a blast to be here, man. Thanks for the invite.
This is really great. I've been wanting to have you on this show now since I met you, and now that the show is back up and running with new episodes, you were one of the first people I contacted to get this interview done, so the pleasure is truly mine. Let's start off with our first question, Scot. Where were you born? And tell me about your upbringing, which eventually led you to becoming a dating expert.
Wow. Okay, well, I was born at a very young age in Baltimore, Maryland, where I grew up. And I'll tell you what, I don't know if I could really attribute much of my upbringing to becoming a dating coach later on, because, man, I had absolutely no at all natural skill with women. I remember changing schools when I was in 7th grade, and a couple of the girls started giving me attention, and I just told them I thought they were making fun of me and mocking me, and that they couldn't possibly really like me.
Mm-hmm.
And so that became a self-fulfilling prophecy, and the girls all started making fun of me. I remember my English teacher pulling me aside going, hey, I don't know what your problem is, Scot, but these girls like you. You should kind of relax and have fun. And it still went completely over my head. So finally around 10th grade, just basically because I went to the beach with my family, as people in Baltimore do. We all go to Ocean City, Maryland in the summer. Some chick literally pulled me off the beach when it was getting dark and said, kiss me. I mean, one of those dream moments for a little kid.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I finally, I got a 2x4 upside the head, as I like to say. And I said, wow, you know what? Girls may actually sort of like me. And things started to turn there. And, started dating a few girls. But by no means was I born to be a natural when I was younger. I think all that came much later.
I have to ask you something. Why did you assume, why was that your first thought that these girls wouldn't have been into you?
Oh, I think I just had horrible self-esteem. Because I didn't have a whole lot of social skill when I was younger. So I did get made fun of some by kids and picked on a little bit. And I just got so used to it, I think. So another thing was I was not from a very rich family, but my parents had managed to get me a scholarship to some highfalutin private school, which I later got kicked out of. Something people don't know, that I got kicked out of private school for behavior. But ultimately, going to this school and being confronted with some of the richest kids in the whole city, and just feeling like, I've just come, I come from a normal family. It just made me a lot more intimidated than probably I would have even been had I gone there, with rich parents or something. You know what I mean?
Do you think that you getting kicked out of private school was an act of self-sabotage just because you didn't feel comfortable there to begin with?
I think it very much was. I wanted to go back to public school. And, there were some other creepy things that went on at that school. But ultimately, I very much wanted out of that school. I've never felt at home in that environment. And even these days, as an adult, Frank, I'm not much into social snobbery. I'm very down to earth, so I never really fit into a situation like that. But yeah, as far as it pertains to getting better with women, it did nothing for me to be at that school either. You know what I mean?
I would still point out, though, that getting yourself kicked out of school, although on the surface seems like a bad thing, still required you to take a certain amount of action for yourself. It required you to decide, okay, I don't want to be here, and I'm going to take steps to ensure that I'm not going to be here anymore. Don't you think that determination, for lack of a better term, factors into what you teach now?
I've never really thought about it that way, but you bring up an intriguing point, because obviously I made the decision to act up and get kicked out of private school, and I never regretted that decision. Matter of fact, by the time I got out of there, I was in 10th grade, and the last 2 years of school were the best 2 years for me. And, things turned out right with my education, with or without that private school. And I do think you're very right. Being able to stand up for one's own destiny and make one's own choices, with or without the blessing of one's parents, I think that did make a difference. And you're very right. It might have set me up for a much more independent future. Ironic, though, isn't it?
I think it's absolutely ironic. Just from hearing the story as an outsider, the only thing I could think of is if I was in that situation and my parents were able to get me to a private school and then I drop out, or I should say get kicked out, I know my parents would have just, they would have been in mourning for something like that. When I was in college, I had dropped out of pure and applied sciences and chose to pursue a career in the creative arts field. And that alone was difficult for my parents to deal with. So I can't even imagine the turmoil you must have gone through with your own family.
Well, I think towards the end there, I was so not enjoying the whole experience that I think they basically capitulated.
Okay.
They were like, okay, fair enough. And I didn't do anything heinous, really, to get kicked out. I basically just was a brat, and ultimately they knew I didn't want to be there anymore, so they called my parents in and said, look, we don't have room in these halls for students who don't want to be here, looking down their nose at everybody. And I remember that meeting where I just basically shrugged my shoulders and said, yep, he's basically telling the truth, and that was pretty much the end of it for me right there.
Do you think that even back then you were coming from a place of strength?
Well, I didn't feel very empowered at that age, because of all the social difficulties. And, when I say social difficulties, I think everybody in 7th or 8th grade doesn't exactly have social skill figured out.
Uh-huh.
The guys who do, the kids who are just naturally gifted socially, of course, they're the ones who attract all the girls. The ones who are bold and confident. You really see, if you want a microcosmic view of how confidence affects the female species, just go to a 7th grade classroom. And there'll be 3 kids in the whole 7th grade who've got this down early, and the girls they're on the girls' minds all the time. The girls are writing the little boys' names on their notebook. And it's never the best looking kid or the most talented kid. It's always the most confident kid, because it's just such a rare commodity when you're that age. And you're going through pre-adolescence and those kind of awkward stages. To be that kind of kid is just amazing to the little girls.
I got to ask you something.